Documentary is extremely competitive. You have to believe that you are the best person to tell this story and that no one else can.
The Kingston Canadian Film Festival proudly presents Rewind Fast Forward, a podcast where we chat with filmmakers about their work and the future of the Canadian cinema. My name is Thom Ernst. Welcome.
Our guest today is filmmaker Vicki Lane. Lane's work is driven by her passion to develop new and engaging ways to tell stories about science and the environment and our place within it. Raised by environmental scientists, her work is motivated by the importance of effectively translating science to politicians and the public. She is currently in post-production on a 6-part docuseries about existential threats to humanity, which she is writing, directing, and series producing. Each episode explores a global catastrophic risk, from asteroids to climate change, and it continues her interest in telling complex stories about science, society, nature, with humanity in heart. While she's tackling these big challenges facing the planet, we take time to reflect on what she considers to be her greatest professional challenge, making her first feature, After the Last River, which played KCFF in 2016. In this film, she documented the complex relationship between mining giant De Beers, multiple levels of government, and the First Nations community of Attawapiskat. So please join host Thom Ernst and Vicki Lane as they delve into questions of documentary ethics and the challenge of working at the intersection of creative nonfiction storytelling, science, and social justice.
I am so thrilled to have Vicki Lane on the show, Rewind Fast Forward, because I did meet you originally, and I don't know how many years ago, but when your first film came out, that brilliant documentary I think at the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. That's where we met. Am I right?
I'm not quite sure where we met exactly, but I have fond memories of meeting you and talking about the film, and also being at the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. It's such a great festival. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to catching up.
Great. You know what? I mean, I'm going to tell you, like, as excited as I am to have you on the show, one of the things that happened when we were deciding whether we're going to do this podcast or not, and what would make the first season of this podcast great, and we were coming up with names, and your name came up, and it was unanimous across the board. I will tell you, you have a huge fan in me, but the producer, Moira, was like,
oh, okay, great,
really excited about you coming on. So this is great. Now, in my mind, you're a filmmaker first. In my mind, you're also an activist, and actually, I wonder if I got that reversed, if perhaps maybe activism comes first and filmmaker is just a good way for you to get your voice out.
Oh, that's a great question. I think, so a little backstory of how I got into filmmaking. Both my parents are environmental scientists, and like that's in my first feature as well. And I was surrounded by so many scientists doing such pressing work. And also working with communities that were affected by big industry and trying to advocate for them. But I just found that no one really cared in the broader public. And we had like 3 channels back then. And I got Nature of Things with David Suzuki. And I'm like, that's where I need to be, because no one cares, Mom and Dad, what you guys are doing. Like, it's important, but nobody cares. So that's originally how I got to making documentaries, is I felt like there was an important disconnect to make between science and the general public in how we communicate pressing problems. So, it seems crazy, but what I wanted to do as a young girl is what I'm doing now. I'm translating complex science for a general public, and I think that is my calling. Sometimes I feel like the word activist is not something I identify with, because I think it's something we should all be talking about and concerning ourselves with. So I do activist work. I guess sometimes that term can alienate people, and I'm trying to develop work that is like an entry point for people, and however they express that, be it going to protests or writing their MPP or voting or their purchase choices, like how they apply that in their daily lives could mean many
It
different
sounds like
things.
that maybe you're a bit aware, or maybe even afraid, that the term activism is aligned with anarchy, and that some people see the two as as being very closely related. You're
Uh,
anything but an anarchist. You are not an anarchist, but you do find, you just told me yourself, and you said it yourself, you do find the issue that needs to be heard. And are you afraid that sometimes pushing that issue, working to express that, is going to align you? Some people are going to align that with the kind of an anarchist approach.
Well, it's funny you use the term anarchist. That's another word I have a complicated relationship to. The last mid-length doc I did for Vice was called Inside the Anarchist Commune in the Rainforest, which I did not like the term anarchist. That was like a very Vice clickbaity title, but it was sort of, I think now the term anarchist is a lot more loaded than it was in that commune that was sort of more rejecting capitalist ideals. So I do think there is a hesitation on my part, especially like my mom, who's an environmental scientist. For whatever reason, she'll be like, I'm not an environmentalist. Like it very explicitly, because those terms are loaded. And my goal, especially with my one of my projects right now, is really a mainstream audience and talking to the people who might vote conservative in Alberta, per se. Like, I want to reach those audiences, and you have to be a little bit sneaky sometimes with how you open those conversations.
Sure, but then there are going to be people who say, no, you can't go in lightly. You can't tread lightly. You have to be, what's the word, bombastic when you're
Mm-hmm.
approached. So are you confronted with any kind of criticism that perhaps maybe you are being too gentle, that perhaps maybe you need to be bombastic?
I've never gotten that criticism. And but maybe I will coming up. But I feel like with After the Last River, the people that I was taking to task, I took to task far harder than anybody else, but I approached it in a way. I'm talking about De Beers, and I pushed them as far as I felt like I could. They did. I don't know if you heard that story. They showed up because it was originally part of my thesis film, and they showed up at my thesis defense and sent a long letter, several pages. I had to get a lawyer. I had to get very expensive E&O insurance. I had a wonderful lawyer, like the best one in Toronto. God bless him, Brian Wynn. Just a little shout out to my lawyer. And then he showed up at the Toronto screening too. And I had to be like, hi, Thom from De Beers. I got your notes. They are reflected in the film. And so I don't think that anyone else took them to task as hard as I did, but I don't think in my tone I had to, and in my format and the style that I approached the film, I didn't have to do it in like a didactic way. I think there's ways you can just let the images speak for themselves as well, and not be like, I think that was a big part of it too, is finding just a different tone and approach to get a hard message.
Yeah, well, and for guys like me who go into these things, and you know, I'm a father of a 13-year-old who is who's constantly going on about, we live in a consumer society, and if she got no gifts this Christmas, she would be thrilled, because
Great.
she is going through this, well, through it. Maybe she'll hang on to it, but the point I'm trying to make is the messages don't always get to me if they don't sort of reach me on a human level. And I think that's what After the Last River did. It was such a human story. So if I'm going to go in and they tell me they want me to review an environmental story and this, I'm going to go, I don't really know anything about this. I should know about it. So are your films directed at guys like me? I'm 60 something. I'm white. I've lived a privileged, a life all my life. Is it hard getting through guys like me?
Well, when I was making After the Last River, I think it's really important when I had this awesome voice coach help me, and I thought she was going to help me enunciate better. But actually, what she taught me was picturing the person that you're speaking to and what you want them to do, like developing a whole character. And the person in my mind was a white upper middle class boy who lives in downtown Toronto. And I'm so thrilled that the film has done so well in high schools in Toronto. And so that was who I was trying to speak to. And I do think that it's harder to change the mind of someone like you, but high school students across this country, even before my film, there was a lot of campaigns like Shannon's Dream. Every young person in the country knows about Attawapiskat, really, and has strong feelings about it. So they're the voters of tomorrow, and that's who I think about making the film for. And then my other project, I'm sort of thinking it's a docuseries, and I'm thinking about people that are in their 30s and 40s as my audience and don't consider themselves activists. And then I have another project dealing kind of with a lot of the eco-anxiety and dread that young people feel, like your daughter's age, perhaps, about the future and about fears of climate change and what their future will be. And I think about who that project's for, and it's for those people who feel it, but also their parents who just don't understand, because there's like an intergenerational kind of disconnect a little bit. It's harder for people of an older generation to feel that fear of the unknown of what 2050 is going to feel like, but for young people that are in their early teens, 2050 is mid-working age. So yeah, I do think about who watches it, and another audience that I'm so proud, the film came out 5 years ago, and so it's not as active. So high school students, high school teachers, but also on the Facebook page, the likes I get, I recognize the last names of Cree families that live in Northern Ontario. So that is another audience that I was happy that the film continued to have a life with, and being used in communities that are facing resource extraction and mining companies coming in, teaching programs that are bringing people in from communities to learn about how to manage that, because it is not something that is easy or taught.
It's amazing listening to you, because I'm thinking of, I'm aware of how difficult it is to get a film made, and yet you were talking about things that are even far more difficult, I think, in my mind. These, talking to these huge industries and mining companies and understanding the ways that they work and how they infiltrate and affect the community that they're sometime in opposition with. You're not, this is, I guess, goes back to my first question. You're not just a filmmaker. There's so many things going on there. This is going to sound like a really odd comparison, but
Okay.
It's been with me since I've heard you talk about your parents, which in fact you mentioned in the movies what your parent do.
Yeah.
And there's kind of almost a superhuman aspect to all of this. Your parents, your parents seem almost otherworldly. I think Tony Stark's parents would have been like you have the background and you have the base of people that really sort of got together and created this very powerhouse filmmaker. And I'm going to keep using the word activist, and I'm sorry if that there's
no, I'll take it. I'm proud of the work.
Okay, so the very powerful activist.
I guess I feel like I could always do more. That's the challenge.
Well, that's your curse then too, isn't it?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you'll never be particularly satisfied. You'll always feel like you left something out.
Mhm.
I'm keenly aware, though, and I think a lot of people are, that you as a non-Indigenous person making films within an Indigenous community, what struck me about After the Last River is the relationship that you took before the camera started to roll. It wasn't an invasion. Talk about that experience, if you will, for me.
It's such an important conversation, and it's one I think about all the time. And even before making this film, it was really important to me, like, that communities tell their own stories and supporting communities and telling it. And anytime that you're interested in doing a story as a filmmaker about a community or involving a community that's not your own, you have to ask yourself, like, who are you to do that? Why are you doing it? And I think documentary is extremely competitive. You have to believe that you are the best person to tell this story and that no one else can. And you have to continue questioning that to make sure that you are the best person to tell this story no matter what. So in the situation with how I came to make After the Last River was extremely unique, and I believe I was the right person and perhaps only person that could tell that particular story. But it started in a very roundabout way where I almost felt like I didn't have an option. I had no option not to try. So I first went up there with my dad, who was invited by the community, by an NGO, to talk about the impact of mercury on the watershed because of the mine opening. The mine had just opened a week before. Community members had questions. My dad was involved in they were trying to launch an environmental bill of rights suit against the mine. And this NGO had all these files, and the community was like, where did you get this information? Like, the scientific reporting was extremely dense. It's not easy to read as a layperson. And my dad had pointed out that they were making errors in their assumptions, and there was information omitted. So not only are there people that are extremely trained to do these reports, but you have to be extremely trained to read extremely complex science. This was a mine that had never been done as an open pit mine. It's like mining a sponge in a bathtub. Had never been done before in this type of watershed. And so I was deeply concerned about the health of young mothers who are most affected by a potential mercury in fish. So I just graduated from my undergrad in film studies and international development, and I couldn't get a job. It was the recession. So my dad's like, why don't you come up and help film? And it was this amazing thing where there's a community meeting. It's in the movie. Wasn't going to make a movie, but where we set up after bingo and people called in their questions. So I helped with the video. So that was my first introduction to the community. And I was just really shocked. There had been such big promises. And this is so classic in development. Big mining company comes in. The community genuinely thought they'd be raised to the standard of Canada. At that point, so this is 2008, no one had heard of Attawabascat. So, and I had also in school before graduating looked at their environmental assessment report. So it was very specifically about the impact of a mining company from an environmental perspective. How is this community going to be negatively impacted, and are the benefits going to outweigh it? So I never went in thinking I was going to make a film about Attawabascat. It was actually about a mining company and holding them to account of whether they kept their promises. But spending time there and speaking with elders, it was so much more complicated. As I learned, it was about the complicity of government to let a community to not provide the basic support required: housing, education, infrastructure, to take advantage of those jobs. So my film in so many ways turned out to be about mining companies and government. It wasn't about the community and per se. I don't talk about Attawabascat's history or what it means to be a member of Attawabascat. And I talked to a lot of another filmmaker, Jules Kustajian, who's an Attawabascat band member and has done some awesome films about her relationship to the community. I'm so fortunate to have had a dialogue with her before going in and while making it about what my role is as an outsider. And I also, it's important to give back and to spend time. So I was 24 too when I went with a camera. I went by myself. And I think it's also important that project, I didn't take funding. from anybody to make it. I had a camera from school because eventually it was doing it through my program. And so being able to spend time there and give back. So I did some video workshops 3 times over the 8 years I went. And the last one I did, I had Jules lead it because that felt more appropriate. And she is able to connect with the youth as a band member herself. So it's important. This is a long answer to your question, but that question never goes away. Who am I to be making this film? What is my role? What is my intention? There was a quote from Susan Sontag's article or book on war photography, and she talks about how the goal of the photographer isn't to elicit sympathy, but to ask the viewer to question how their own privilege is complicit in that. So that is what my film is about. How are we in Toronto and the wealth that we've built in the rest of Canada complicit in the suffering of Attawapiskat? So the film involves community members, and actually if you look at it, most of the time they're commenting on what someone down south is saying or someone's misconception about what that community is. So it's a complicated thing. And I think it's really important, though, regardless, when you go and make a story that involves a community that's not your own, is to say who you are, who I am, where I come from, who my parents are. Like, I do that in the beginning of the movie. It was so evidently my perspective and my experience. And it was important to foreground that at the top and be open about it. I feel very fortunate that, it wasn't just upon me. Like, by the time this film came out, I think every journalist in Canada had written something about Attawapiskat. So, and in some ways that put a greater burden because a lot of it was really bad misrepresentation. And then also Canada's greatest Indigenous filmmaker, Alanis Abomsawin, she made like 3 films involving Attawapiskat. So a lot has been made about the community, and I had to be very clear on what was the only story that I could tell, and that I think I had an obligation to, because I had access to the science and insight into the shortcomings of De Beers. And I think that's also a hard story for a community member to tell, because one activist told me that he was trying to kick up a fuss and an elder was like, "Are you trying to starve your people?" Like, there's a lot of within a community, you're afraid that the mining company might leave, so you don't want to speak up. And it's also, I have a tremendous amount of privilege to hire a lawyer if I get sued. So that is kind of my answer to your question, but also being accountable to the community. I went and screened the film there. Well, people in the film saw it before I finished it, and I screened it before I finished it. And there were certain things I definitely wasn't sure about including. Like, I did not mention residential school because I felt like that was an experience that is not at all what I should tell. But when I was there and screening it to the community, I realized that I needed to have some mention of it somehow. So all that process was like in dialogue, but being aware of what story is mine to tell and what is not is an ongoing process, I think, regardless of where you're from. And especially if you're not from the community. Yeah, there's an important dialogue that needs to happen, and I hope that people, their fear of saying the wrong thing doesn't stop them from trying to engage. And that's sort of where I land with making that film. Is I had a unique responsibility and a unique access and unique expertise, or access to expertise, to tell a story that wasn't going to get attention otherwise.
Yeah, and I think because of that expertise, because of your parents, because of Ali, who supporting you, and your own knowledge. What's your degree in, by the way?
Yeah, and I would also add like people in the community, like Rosie in the film, and Jules Kustajian, And I also spoke quite a bit with Jorge Barrera, who at the time was an APTN journalist, and we exchanged footage and conversations, and other Indigenous filmmakers who filmed at Idle No More that shared their footage. So there was a larger community of people that I was constantly getting kind of insight and feedback from elders, even in the community while I was there. I participated in quite a few things. And when the film was finished, I knew one of the reoccurring questions at panels is, what can I do to help? And I always go back to the community and ask, like, how do I answer this question? And it varies from time to time, but it's been something that, I never wanted to just fly into that community and leave. Like, I do feel like my commitment to that community is lifelong. So I don't take it lightly. So it's not like an easy project by any means. Sometimes I think I'll never find a harder project. Right now I kind of might, but it's harder for different reasons. But I definitely think that was the hardest thing I've ever done.
But my background, you were asking, do you want me to
I was going to repeat that. Yeah.
So I did my undergrad at McGill in cultural studies, film studies and international development studies. So I had to do my undergrad thesis paper was on post-independence Algerian cinema and nation building.
Oh, so, that was popular.
Yeah.
Very much about the role of cinema in building national identity in post-colonial Algeria. And then I went to York to do my MFA in film production, and I was very, documentary filmmaking. Oh, Rick Bienstock I've been bugging Rick Bienstock since I was a teenager about being a documentary filmmaker. And from the beginning, she's been like, don't do it. Bad idea. No money. So I was a little bit worried about that, making a living. So I also did my MBA when I was at York. But that was interesting because I do think that helped me get access to De Beers, because I did like an independent study with this woman who does complexity science and interviewed this mining exec prof at York. So when I wrote De Beers, I was like, I'm a business student looking at development of Attawapiskat because of the mine. Like very much like straight language, and learning how to speak a very business language, I think helps in gaining access to certain types of people and seeing the problem from a nuanced way.
So passionate language would not work with something like De Beers. Like somebody just being emotional, upfront, and passionate would probably scare them off.
Yeah, I would imagine. Or even if it was someone, yeah. So I just used neutral business language, and a lot of my questions were very neutral. Like it was for them to step it in themselves. And I do think for most De Beers, to their defense, I don't think realized how Attawapiskat would be like a developing country. You go to Papua New Guinea, you kind of have an expectation as a mining company that you might have to build the school, you might have to provide water. But here we're in Canada, and you would assume that the students in the local community would be getting an education at the standard of the rest of Canada, that they would have drinking water. This was their first mine outside of the African continent. I do not think they were remotely prepared for the challenges of hiring and the relationship between the community and how challenging it was. So
they assumed that because it's Canada, that there was an infrastructure already in place.
Yeah. And also, this is the government's responsibility. Why should we do it? So at the time, Attawapiskat desperately needed a school, but why should they? Like, that is something the government should pay for in Canada. It's Canada. Why should the mining company do it? They could. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. I actually had a phone conversation with my MPP 2 days ago because I'm very disappointed in the lack of progress on Indigenous education, and that's a federal responsibility. But here in Ontario, we deliver education at a provincial level. So what is the province doing to really support closing the gap on reserve education with the rest of Canada? So there's quite a few issues that are all intertwined that I learned about that I've not seen any progress on that are really important if mining in Ontario continues, and will provide the benefits that it does to the rest of the province.
Well, you have said a lot, and you've said a lot with this film. I mean that in the
Yeah.
best way. You have, exposed a lot, and certainly created others to consider empathetically what you've shown. And so I certainly had hoped that the community was doing better. And
they have a school, so that's better. And I would also say when Attawapiskat makes it back into the news, which it does periodically, and it was back in the news because of boiled water, the tone in the media has changed enormously. How we talk about Attawapiskat, because that was a big part of the film. Once like Rosie was just trying to show the world they existed. That's why she sort of took me on and took anybody on that was coming to the community. And then the world finds out, and the response is horrific under the Harper government, with the media, with social media. So I was always very attentive to how the media was talking about I would say the last half of the film is all about that. But it's much better when Attawapiskat's in the news. The comments, the tone of the reporter, the tone of the article. CBC Indigenous has since launched. And so there's definitely a tone shift, but we need to have action as well at a policy level.
So when you talked originally, you going back a little bit, and you mentioned that you were talking to a documentary filmmaker who was everything but encouraging.
Oh yeah.
And it's interesting because I have a friend who is also now a documentary filmmaker, has been for quite some time. And when she was trying to begin, she wanted me to talk to my boss, who is a documentary filmmaker. And his response was exactly the same. He wouldn't even talk to her. He just told me to tell her to get out of it. I was really sort of disappointed with that response because it seems to me that there's no career that you can't stay away from, because there are hurdles, and sometimes those hurdles seem insurmountable. Did that negative response that you got, you mentioned that it was a bit discouraging, but you went on ahead anyway. What was it that kept you driving forward, that allowed you to push that voice inside your head, and in fact other people's, that were telling you that this was a hopeless venture?
Yeah, I think it is just knowing that there are important things happening in the world, and we're not doing a good job of sharing it with each other and of talking about it, and they're too complex to be summarized in news headlines. You need an hour and a half or more to really unpack it and to deliver it in a way. So I think I've never really taken no, I suppose, for an answer. And also, like, to Rick Bienstock's credit, she had done an Ebola film and the sex slaves film, and she just runs into the fire. And she still does it. And so she said it a little bit jokingly, but it is hard. And I think especially with television documentaries, when you're making a feature, sometimes you can be left alone and just like work through it. And then in television, there's a lot of more intersection with the broadcaster and needing to tell the story with certain points, like in a broadcast format, hit a commercial break. So that makes it also hard. But I guess keep going. Like the series I'm working on now is so fascinating, and I've never felt like it was more relevant to this moment. And the challenge, and I feel very fortunate. I have such a great team. I have such wonderful people we're working with, and contributors, and the broadcaster is excited about this weird, strange, risk-taking show. So when you get those opportunities, it's like, oh yeah. But shooting under COVID is so hard. Like, we have to shoot some things remotely. It's totally reinventing this, but COVID is actually part of the storyline. So
you spoke around the subject of this new film. Is that on purpose?
No, I can talk about it. So 2 years ago, I started working with Stuart Henderson and 90th Parallel, developing a docuseries about existential risk, which is the fancy academic term for all threats to humanity. So we have an episode on, and it's hosted. We have a great host who hasn't been announced yet, because we're still shooting. But we have an episode on asteroids, nuclear war, pandemic. We started our pandemic episode October 2018. So that was interesting to have been working on a speculative pandemic episode and a real pandemic interrupts you.
You were on camera throughout your film. Why didn't you consider hosting?
Because I think me as an environmental scientist daughter, I immediately read as an activist, and also the tone, I think it's too much, and the tone of the show is very playful, and I think we're trying, it's smart. It's like right now there's so much doom and gloom, we can't scare the shit out of people more than they already are, but sometimes facing the worst case scenario can actually be a form of therapy. And so it was important to have someone who also could go on a genuine journey, and work with that person to guide us and to bring in an audience that I wouldn't. Someone who could take us on a journey, who is an everyman, who could embody sort of a perfect like sense of existential dread, who is learning things for the first time, engaging with science in the first time, and filming like hosted, just from a technical perspective, a hosted doc series, we sometimes have 3 cameras. Sometimes we've had 4. And to get the camera, even when I'm standing in and like on the monitor trying to check the camera and like get all the angles, it's very hard to do that and to think of these questions, and they're such complex issues. So it's not something, and also when we wrote the Bible, I was like, someone like this person, never thinking I would get that person, and then we got that person. So he was always who we wrote in mind for. I'm really excited for when it comes out, but it's sort of like, I don't have kids, but I imagine it's like when you first give birth to something, you don't want to like have all the family over and like announce it to the world. You just want to like contain it and like nuance the show and figure out like how we are in the world. So we're kind of like in that space right now. We're birthing this child together, and we're all just really excited and trying to finish it in a way that feels like the best, without too many other people being like, oh, what's that about? Why'd you do that? But no, it's really exciting and I think really important in this moment. Like, we knew a pandemic is coming, and we did not prepare. A lot of scientists we've interviewed, we actually filmed like a model coronavirus simulation in New York in October with World Health leaders, where they simulated a global pandemic with a novel coronavirus. But we knew one was coming. We did not prepare. What else do we know is coming, and how can we be better prepared for these big threats to humanity?
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but okay. So as far as you being host, many of those things that you said, I think you could have pulled off very easily, but maybe not the learning for the first time bit. And I understand the four cameras. That's not a documentary series. That's a variety show. 4 cameras, that's a lot, isn't it, in production these days?
So we have like one on the host, and then one on the guest, and then we have a wide. And then we did a remote interview recently where our host is on a laptop talking to a guy on his cell phone at Oxford. So we have a camera there. And then on our room, we had 3 cameras because one was on the laptop angle. So that's 3 cameras in the room. And then we also video recorded the Zoom conversation. So it's just like brain exploding. We're trying to figure it out and do it in a way that is like more streamlined, but that was our first go at it. We have another series kind of coming up where Yeah, but no, this host can access an audience that I only dream of accessing. Like, we want to reach a conservative voter in Alberta as much as we want to reach, someone who is a hardcore climate activist in Halifax, so someone who has reach and can make these topics relatable. I can get a little academic if I'm allowed, if people let me. So I think having that translated is really great.
Well, of course, I'm curious of who this is, but we will wait. Like everyone else, we will wait. And I have all these names in my head of who it could possibly be, but I won't even guess in case I get it right.
Yeah, don't guess.
I won't guess. Not on air anyways. I'll guess remotely in my house. Well, I'll have a conversation about it. So we talked about documentary filmmaking, and you're at a position in your career where you're still very young. You're still you've done a lot, but it's almost too soon to ask you who you look to as the next and up and coming. But since I'm not an academic, I'm going to ask you that anyway. I'm going to ask if there is a documentary filmmaker or a filmmaker, and whatever, somebody that you're looking at now that's up and coming in Canada that you think we should maybe keep our eye out for.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what's so hard with making long form documentary. It takes so long. You're like, oh my God, I've been working on this one for 2 years now. Like, do people still remember me? But no, that's true. But someone I love and I think is extremely talented, Alex Lazarovich. She had a short film win at Sundance last year, Fast Horse. I consider us to be at kind of the same level or professionally, but she's just really impressive as a creative, also as a producer. She's a producer on series producer on Still Standing, so we talk about that aspect of it, but she's got a lot of great projects. She has one coming out pretty soon, so she's someone I think is really awesome, and they're a collective that I look at them, especially now that we are having to tell more stories online. They're a collective called Shy Kids, but they did a lot of the graphics for The Great Hack and a lot of big HBO, and they do some of their own stuff. So I think they're really awesome. And someone I also look to for inspiration about how to because I'm trying to find lighter ways to tell stories about climate change. Like, I'm at a loss.
Could these things translate? You were talking about looking at ways to tell these stories in a lighter fashion. Can they translate into a more the fictionalized narrative? Could you do that, or would you do that?
Yeah, actually, there's one project I have in development that I really oscillate between wanting to do as a fiction film versus a historical doc, but I think I might land somewhere in the middle, like do a hybrid with dramatic reenactments. After The Last River, I spent 2 years producing Nirvana the Band, the show, which was sort of a hybrid comedy doc. I think it was more doc than people realized, even though it was a fiction show. So I think that's really important, especially there's so much gloom, and with my other project, talking to young people about their fears. I don't take any of people's fears lightly, or any of the issues lightly. So finding places where we could find a laugh and kind of common humanity, I think is really important, or people shut down. And that's what I've learned in a lot of the climate storytelling, is it just turns people off. It's like, oh, I can't. But there's some hope in these things. Like, our spoiler on our asteroids episode, we're doing pretty well if an asteroid was coming, like in deflection technology and how we would stop an asteroid. So I never thought that making an episode about asteroids actually helps us understand what we did wrong in the pandemic and how we could do better with climate change.
Doing this series, though, does it scare you? Are there things that we don't know that you know Like you could say, after we get off air, you could say, Thom, by the way, build that bomb shelter, like something like that.
No. There's definitely the things that scare us, level of misinformation and conspiracy theory, I think is what is the biggest fear when it comes to these things, and how we negotiate uncertainty as a kind of common humanity, and making decisions under uncertainty. I do think that downloading like CRISPR and emerging biotech, like you could download the sequence to Ebola, and there are fears that in the future someone could tinker with it, with CRISPR, to make it more, those are bad. That's quite bad, but we're not quite there yet.
As a scientist, as a daughter of a scientist, so you're almost like, you've got all that inbred in you. It's there in your DNA. And your knowledge. Conspiracy theories, are they sometimes the biggest threat to us more than anything else? Is the
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're our own worst enemy for sure. And even though my dad is a scientist, he's 83 now, so he doesn't quite have. And I don't know what Facebook's doing, but it seems like it's feeding him some fake news links, or someone on his feed keeps posting fake news. And like, he's definitely forwarded me something about the Pfizer vaccine, and I had to be like, Dad, this is fake news. So he's an incredibly intelligent scientist, but he doesn't have the media literacy to necessarily know how extremely good fake content can be right now.
This has been amazing conversation. I knew I was going to love this chat, and I have. I will say too that our other guest too that we had on, who also is Moira, our producers, is a big fan of and was so excited about getting, was Matt Johnson. So you two have that in common, working with Matt, who was a delight as well.
Mm-hmm. Matt has taught me how important it is to fight for your own work. Like, I think as a female filmmaker going into some things, you're like, okay, like you want to make everybody happy, or like, what do you think? And working with Matt Johnson, I don't think I'll ever be at Matt Johnson's level, but I always admired his conviction to his art and not taking notes from anybody. Like he will, and there's definitely been things where I've been like, Matt, don't do it. And he'll do it. And then that'll get us in trouble. And the broadcast will be like, fix it. And he'll be like, nope. And he'll just keep pushing. And then eventually it'll get out there one way or another. So,
but does that hurt him?
I do love that about.
I don't know. It might, but he always manages to get out on top. So, I do think that in this business, you will get notes, and it's an art to find the nugget of what they're getting at, but sometimes the solution is not always the solution to the problem. It identifies a problem. So I do appreciate that about Matt Johnson. He is a singular person on that front.
I was going to end this conversation, but you brought something up that's worth mentioning. You called yourself a female director. We avoid calling you a female director. We called you a filmmaker. How important is being a female director then? I only asked because you identified yourself that way. So it seems to me that there's still some reason to keep that moniker.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think especially, so now I'm a female filmmaker of a certain age, in my mid-30s. And when I was at Vice as well, I did not see a lot of female executives with children, or I don't know that many female directors who have kids. And certainly it crossed my mind, when you're on these big, long television projects, they keep going without you. You have to, if you're making a feature and you come up with the topic and you have some sort of like that film, kind of going back to what I was saying at the beginning, you have to be the only person who can tell this story. Because it is technically a human right that you can't lose your job if you have a child. But I don't know, in television, if you are a lead creative and the show is set and you have a schedule and a broadcast deadline, I do think that sometimes either you have a fear that it'll go on without you if you need to step out. And I've seen some men, like when I was making Nirvana the band, our exec, his wife had a kid and he was gone for 2 weeks and came back, or especially with documentary, when you're traveling, it's physically quite demanding sometimes and you're doing long days. So how do you make that work? So I do think there is that element, and a lot of our business is not, we're freelancers, so we're not paying necessarily, so it's not like we get maternity leave. So these are kind of questions as I'm getting older. I'm like, can I do this career? Can I be a director and be a mom? Like I see a few women who have done that, but like Brett Story is incredible filmmaker. She's also a teacher, and she produces and directs her own stuff. So I think you have to really have a project that will wait, or I don't know if we've sorted that out, but I do not see a lot of, especially on the doc side. I could be wrong. Like Rick has kids, and I talked to her about how she does that balance. And a lot of it comes down to still like producing projects for other people sometimes too.
Well, then that's true, because I while you were talking, I was thinking of, I can name you 3, but at least 2 of the people I was going to name also produced. So like Cornelia Principe, who's done a lot, Barry Cohen, and then the woman I talked to who wanted me to talk to my boss is doing very well, Elia Hussein. All of them parents, but 1 child each, and they didn't go for the second, so maybe that says something. I don't know. I'll wrap things up again by saying, Vicki Lane, so wonderful to chat.
So wonderful.
I love chatting with you, and I love the film festival, and I hope that by the time this comes out, we'll be in a better place in the pandemic, and hopefully some gatherings will be possible.
And I know a lot of people who would love to see your film. So, I think it will continue after The Last River. We'll continue making the rounds. I think it does great work. And there's so much more to talk about on this subject. So we will have you on again.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
A huge thank you to our guest, Vicki Lane, for spending time with us. You can find out more about Vicki's upcoming projects in the show notes. Rewind Fast Forward is hosted by Thom Ernst and produced with original theme music by Moira Demorest. That's me. Support for this podcast comes from the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, which is situated on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. This podcast is generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. Thanks for listening.